Ever wondered if one night alone in the mountains can unravel everything you thought you knew? It started innocently enough that gray February morning when I stepped off the bus in Phoenicia, New York. Snow still clung to the gutters and tree branches. My breath rose in pale clouds as I hoisted my duffel higher on my shoulder, sketchbook pressed tight to my chest. Only 2 months earlier, I'd been finishing my last semester at Pratt Institute in Brooklyn. Now, somehow, I was here, starting my first real job at an art center tucked into the Catskills. The town of Phoenicia was small, the kind of place where coffee steamed from mismatched mugs and everyone nodded hello. The art center sat on the edge of it all, in an old brick schoolhouse that smelled faintly of pine and turpentine. My role wasn't glamorous: assistant curator, jack of all chores, occasional workshop helper. But it felt like a doorway to something real. In those first weeks, I found myself staring through the tall studio windows whenever the light began to fade. The mountains rose in quiet blues, their ridges softened by snow and distance. I couldn't wait for spring, just to walk there, to see what color the world would become. By March, the frost began to melt in narrow lines along the sidewalks, and I started sketching everything: the draining puddles, the bare trees, even the crows that seemed to shout at the changing season. It wasn't homework anymore, it was hope. When April finally came, I could almost hear the hills breathing again. Buds pushed through the soil, streams ran wild with runoff, and I laced up my boots. I wasn't a student now, not really. I was an artist, learning the shape of this new landscape, brushstroke by muddy brushstroke. It had been 2 quiet months at the art center, routine days of hanging paintings, sorting brushes, and watching snow melt off the ridges. But one Friday in late March, I packed my sketchbook, a flashlight, and a borrowed tent, and decided to spend a night alone in the Catskills. I told myself it was for inspiration, to capture the muted colors of early spring before the leaves returned. I hiked until the sun dipped behind the hills. The woods were still bare, skeletal against the bruised sky. I found a small clearing near a creek, set up camp, and started sketching by the fading light. That's when I noticed something odd. The forest was quiet, too quiet. No owls, no rustle of small animals, not even wind. And the deeper night grew, the more I felt it, a rhythm beneath the silence, like something breathing far below the ground. By the time I reached the clearing, the sun was a red smear behind the peaks. The trees stood dark and thin around me, like a cathedral of bare bones. I pitched my small green tent, gathered some dead branches, and coaxed a wavering flame from my lighter. The fire caught reluctantly, crackling soft against the cold. I ate from a can, listening to the creek murmur nearby. The air smelled of damp earth and pine. A perfect place to draw, I thought. I opened my sketchbook and tried to capture the curve of the mountains, the jagged trees against the dying light. But as the shadows lengthened, I started seeing shapes that didn't belong there. Clusters of stones arranged in spirals near the tree line, a faint symbol carved into one of the birches. At first, I told myself they were remnants of some local hiker's project, art or folklore installations maybe. Still, the firelight seemed to bend strangely when it touched them, flickering blue at the edges. Then I heard it, a low hum drifting from somewhere beyond the creek. A melody, almost, but too slow, too heavy. I strained to listen, but it faded into the dark before I could make sense of it. The woods went silent again. Even the water seemed to hush. I felt a sudden chill and zipped myself into the tent early. The wind began to pick up, tapping branches against the fabric like fingers. I kept my flashlight on for a while, staring at the canvas glowing pale orange around me. Eventually, the hum of the wind lulled me, and my eyes grew heavy. Just before sleep pulled me under, I thought I heard something outside. Soft footsteps circling the tent, then a whisper, almost polite, asking if I was still awake. And then, nothing. I tried to drift back to sleep, pulling my sleeping bag tighter around me, but my mind kept replaying the symbols and that faint whisper from earlier. The tent walls glowed faintly from the dying embers outside, and the silence pressed in like a held breath. Then it came, a sharp, piercing whistle slicing through the dark, close enough to raise the hairs on my neck. I bolted upright, heart hammering, blaming the wind or some fox in the brush. But the night stayed eerily still. No leaves stirred, no branches creaked, just that pure, unnatural quiet wrapping the clearing like a shroud. Cold seeped through the nylon floor, yet sweat beaded on my forehead, trickling down my back. The whistle repeated, slower this time, almost warped and ancient, pulling at something deep in my chest. I gripped my flashlight, thumb hovering over the switch, afraid to look. Footsteps crunched softly beyond the fabric now, deliberate, pausing right at the zipper. "Still awake?" the voice murmured again, closer, with a rustle like dry leaves shaping words. The sweat turned icy as an unseen force tugged at me, not hands, but a pull like gravity shifting sideways, yanking me toward the tent zipper. My body betrayed me, legs unfolding against my will, fingers fumbling the flashlight on with a desperate click. The beam cut through the dark, trembling in my grip. Outside, crouched low by the spiral stones, was the shape, a hulking figure, man-like but wrong. Its back was to be at first, covered in matted moss and bark, antlers twisting up from a head bowed too low. When it turned, hollow eyes glinted back, black as spring mud, and its mouth stretched wide in a grin of jagged roots. It rose slowly, impossibly tall, whistling that same warped tune as roots writhed at its feet, reaching for the tent flap. My body lurched forward one more step, the zipper teeth parting on their own. I fell hard, my knees slamming into frozen ground as the zipper hissed open. The world spun black, and everything went silent. I woke cold, sprawled half in and half out of the tent, dawn's gray light bleeding through the trees. It took long minutes for the night to rush back, the whistle, the pull, those hollow eyes and root-toothed grin. I was shaking, deep tremors I couldn't stop, breath fogging in ragged bursts. Frantic, I swept my flashlight around the clearing. Nothing. No tracks, no roots, no sign of whatever forest thing that I saw. I crawled back inside, zipping the flap tight, and spent the rest of the night huddled in my sleeping bag, trembling, ears straining for any hint of that whistle in the wind. After an hour or so, when the light strengthened enough to chase the shadows from the clearing, I tore down my camp in a frenzy, tent stuffed haphazardly into its sack, sketchbook shoved under my arm, and ran all the way back to Phoenicia, lungs burning, branches whipping my face. For the next few days, I barely left the art center. I called in sick, huddled in my rented room above the bakery, blinds drawn against the mountains that now loomed like silent judges. Sleep came in fits, haunted by whistles and hollow eyes, but I told myself it was just exhaustion, a bad trip from the wild. Then, without realizing, my pencil found the page. At first, it was mindless doodling during a workshop break. Spirals, antlers, bark-wrapped limbs. By evening, full sketches emerged. That thing that I saw in every pose, its root grin sharper each time, as if my hand moved on its own, pulling the thing from memory into ink. The next Friday, I forced myself to the local diner in Phoenicia, craving something normal. Greasy eggs, the murmur of locals. My sketchbook lay open beside my plate, pages filled with those relentless drawings of antlers and hollow eyes. An elderly couple, Regulars at the arts center, who often brought jars of wild honey for workshops, slid into the booth across from me. In the flow of small talk about the muddy spring trails, their eyes caught the open page. "Mind if we take a peek, dear?" the woman asked, her voice warm. I shrugged and passed it over. They froze, faces draining white, the man's fork hovering midair. I begged them to explain. "Please, what is it?" Until they relented, voices dropping low. "That's old Maasai," the woman whispered, glancing at the mountains beyond the window. "Not Lenape mind, but older, with the first trappers brought in their whispers from the old country, mixed with the woods here. A huldra-kin, or close kin, born where roots drink too deep from cursed springs, lures the lonely with whistles, pulls them under to feed the dark below. Seen it in your eyes, boy, you've been marked." Her husband nodded grimly. "Disturbs the spirit stones, wakes it hungry. Folks who draw it like that, they don't stop till it claims the paper, or the hand holding it." I laughed it off then, but my sketches stared back, sharper than before, as if they'd heard every word. I left the diner that night with my sketchbook clutched tight, the old couple's words burning in my ears. By morning, every page stared back with those hollow eyes, the antlers branching sharper, as if the ink had grown roots overnight. I packed my duffel in a panic, Pratt diploma stuffed at the bottom, brushes abandoned in the art center sink, and caught the first bus out of Phoenicia before noon. The Catskills shrank in the rear window, their ridges blurring into a bruised horizon I swore I'd never cross again. As the city lights flickered closer, I made a silent promise to myself. No mountains, no spirals, no whistling dark. Whatever old Maasai wanted, it wouldn't get me. Not ever. If you like the story, please like and subscribe.